All right. Hello, my name's Ethan,
I'm Ben.
I'm Kabir.
and welcome to My Matters. Today we are doing another take of our award-winning episode, The Pursuit of Happiness, that won second place in the John Drury Awards. And we think it's going to be better today because not only is it just me and Ben, we've also added another person into the mix, Kabir Kutty. So
Yes, very glad to be.
yes, we're very excited, and hopefully today's episode is even better than the award-winning one that we made a few months ago. So, like I said, welcome to My Matters. This is a mental health podcast that's unique because it focuses on mental health for high school students. So we have kind of a little intro. Ben, why don't you go ahead and...
Yeah. Depression, anxiety, or that uneasy, empty, or lonely feeling inside of you is very common and normal amongst high schoolers, but it is not talked about. The goal of this show is to make you feel like your experiences are normal and recognized. We also will give you practical solutions to improve your life. Mind Matters is the only podcast that talks about those ugly feelings from a high school perspective.
Yes, so... Right, so we're going to be picking different topics every week to kind of focus on and kind of dig into the mental health of being in high school. We feel like being in high school is very, very busy. It's just super, super rough, and you're constantly under so much pressure. And, we all feel like mental health, right? It is talked about in school, but there's definitely a stigma, right? And it kind of comes off as cliche and something that people don't really want to talk about. And the most they're willing to do is just, oh, let's just try to smile today, right? So our goal is trying to dig into this and try to be real and upfront, because in order to actually bring awareness to mental health for high schoolers, whether it be high schoolers listening, parents listening, teachers, really whoever, it's important that they know the full story, the full picture of 3 high school students who are currently, in junior year. So yeah, today's topic is about happiness. So we start off every podcast, radio show with defining our terms. So happiness, Ben, what does happiness mean to you?
Happiness to me is the time I spend with my family and friends, and and the enjoyable feelings I get from that time I spent with them.
Kabir, what about you?
Happiness for me, more generally, is just an active enjoyment of things I'm grateful for. So, for example, that's family, various activities like music, different hobbies. That type of activity those types of activities are extremely important for me. And by engaging in them and spending time with those I'm close to, I get a sense of pleasure from that. And that for me is happiness.
Yeah, it's great. That's great. In terms of me, right, my definition that I kind of built before this is kind of just enjoying life, everyday life. When you wake up, the good, the bad, everything, right? People think that happiness should be only when something goes well in your life, right? For high schoolers, it could be doing well on a test, performing well at a game. But I think being truly happy is being not complacent, being accepting of like everything that is in your life, even the bad stuff, right? It's just we'll get into this, but like reframing your perspective and just finding a way to just enjoy life as it is. So those are our definitions. That's kind of our take on what it means to be happy. But the textbook definition is happiness is a state of well-being and contentment, or more simply put, joy. So I think that's also good, right? Joy, that's definitely, being happy. But I feel like there's more to this, right? So now that we've kind of defined our terms, we're going to move into talking about our experiences, right? So, Ben, do you want to go ahead and talk about like, how do you find happiness, as a busy high school student?
So I think I'm kind of personally, really, to be honest, I'm kind of in this unhealthy zone where I value grades, right, as kind of my sole determiner of happiness and achievements, rather than, what I'm maybe adding to the world, like a give and take, like the people I'm with, my gratitude, my relationships. I feel like to be honest, I'm in this like unhealthy rut almost of valuing grades. So, happiness for me, in the long term, right, comes from the time I spend with my family. And I'm sure we'll get into more of like long-term, short-term happiness later. But really, right now, like my short-term happiness is kind of these shallow accomplishments, and I need to improve on that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Kabir, what about you?
Right. So, there are different types of happiness, and, that some are more sustainable than others. The type of happiness that, the short term happiness Ben was describing in terms of grades, I think all high schoolers are susceptible to that, right? All high schoolers value grades. They think that, by achieving a certain like score on an exam, they're going to feel this like boost in happiness. But the problem with that is like, over time, that tends to kind of drain you because then you're solely focusing on the aspect of, the result. And all that time you spent putting in effort to achieve that result basically can go down the drain if the result isn't what you expect it to be. So that kind of unsustainable happiness is something that, we're all susceptible to as high schoolers, or at some point we were. And, that's something we really need to take into consideration, especially with developing more sustainable types of happiness in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's great. And like you mentioned, like it's such a fleeting feeling, right, in our daily lives. Like for me, my experiences, right, some days really, really suck. Like let me kind of describe a really bad day for me where I'm just not happy, right? So like let's say I don't do well on a test, right? I get a pretty bad score, and then in one class, and then I have to go to another class, and then I have to do an hour and a half of just constant work, right? I have to move from class to class and constantly just I don't have a break, I feel like, except this 45-minute lunch period, which I sometimes have to do other work for classes. And then to add on to that, that school, I sometimes, most of the times, have baseball before or after school. I volunteering. I know Ben and Kabir were all pretty busy with that kind of stuff. So we really like, it's just to actually be happy. It's like we don't prioritize that because we just want to get all these set tasks done. School, sports, volunteering, right?
Yeah, and I think you bring up an interesting pitfall of kind of this short-term happiness mindset, because you talk about, when you're happy, you get a good grade on a test, you can go home, do your homework, you're in a good mood, you're in a rhythm. But when you get a bad grade, your entire happiness is ruined because you're only valuing short-term happiness, and then you don't want to do your work. You get unmotivated. You maybe take it out on family and friends, and that can really have, over the long term, which is what real happiness is, negative consequences. And that's what, ideally you want to avoid. Obviously it's kind of inevitable to, value grades and stuff like that. But it is important to recognize that over time, if you're doing it to too high of, if you're giving it too high of a value or importance, it's going to drain you.
Yeah, just for sure. So I think that's the first thing, right, that we're kind of getting into. High school students, just it's so hard to find long-term happiness because there's so many little events that make up each day, right? It's really hard to find that.
Yeah, so I think an interesting question from all of this, like when we're talking about short-term happiness, is like, why do students get like, prioritize that kind of happiness the most in the first place? And I think a lot of that has to do with the ease of getting that, right? So like that momentary boost and like dopamine or happiness that you feel from a good test result, that seems like a more, concrete, easily achievable result than like, prioritizing long-term happiness, which can be more vague. It can involve more steps. It can be more taxing on you and your mind, right?
Mhm.
So in order to achieve like some sense of happiness in your busy schedule, to like get the maximum that you feel like you can achieve, I think a lot of students think that, getting those momentary boosts is like the easiest way to let that happen. And so that kind of happiness tends to be more dominant.
So you bring up short-term versus long-term happiness, right? And we'll get into that later. But you also mentioned dopamine, right? So in terms of the neuroscience, right, it's happiness it's a science, right? Neuroscience. We're learning this in bio, right, Kavir?
Yeah.
Like dopamine, there's certain neurotransmitters that kind of regulate your mood and how you feel. And there's certain parts of the brain, like the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, right? There are specific parts in the brain that are responsible for, feeling happy, right? And it's like throughout the school day, I feel like I'm so stimulated. I have so many things going on, so many people I'm talking to, so many things I have to do, that it's like, it's just, I can just picture my brain just like firing, right? With all these signals of happiness and stress and anxiety. It's a really big mess unless you kind of sit down and like unpack those feelings. So I think, right, in terms of high school experiences, our experiences, that kind of, I guess the big picture, right, is just we have so many things going on, right? I'm sure everyone knows that. If you know high school, there's just so many things going on, especially if you're a junior. Like right now, Ben, Kabir, and I we're really in the trenches right now. We're now multiple APs, um, tons of extracurriculars, and it's really hard. So I think in terms of our experiences, that's why happiness is so hard to achieve, especially long-term happiness. You can achieve these short-term spurts, right? Oh, I did well on the test, right? But eventually that goes away because what do you have tomorrow? Another APUS test or another bio, whatever,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like that kind of wraps up our experiences. In terms of factors or like obstacles that go into it, Ben, what do you think like goes into happiness, not just for like high schoolers, but in terms of like people in general? Like, why do people feel happy sometimes? Like, what is kind of the triggers for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think also it's important to just recognize that when we talk about, happiness, like you said, it is a sign. And it's a very, although we talk about it in a kind of a subjective way, in an instant, in a moment, to determine if someone's happy, it's a very chemical and objective, it's your chemical and kind of objective metrics like serotonin, dopamine, to determine if someone's happy. So it is very scientific, and obviously, I try to emphasize this every episode, but like there are some people who have actual like I don't know if a disease is the right word, but like just disadvantages with these chemicals, or they have like chemical imbalances that make them unhappy a lot. I know I've experienced that. So it's important to recognize if you have that, it doesn't make you abnormal. It's scientific. It's objective. It's not subjective. You can't control it. It doesn't have to do with your attitude, and it's okay. So I think it's important to try and recognize that. But also, I think happiness for a lot of people has to do in the short term with comparison, and obviously that can have some negative pitfalls, and I think it's important to talk about that as well.
Yeah, you mentioned comparison. And now that we've kind of moved into factors or like obstacles that play into happiness, right? We kind of talked about our daily experiences, but I think something that's also added into the mix that isn't talked about enough is the effect of social media, right? So Ben and I, we've been doing so many shows, radio shows that kind of where we've been talking about social media, and it's crazy because Ben often, brings up the fact that the only two industries that call their the people who use the product users is the drug industry, right, and the social media industry, and we feel like, you know, people don't really understand why that is. You're using the product, right, on a daily basis. And I feel like the reason why it's so harmful in terms of happiness is because of comparison. So, Kabir, have you ever heard comparison is the thief of all joy?
Yes, that is a big thing for high schoolers. Okay, like in every single class, right? Even today, we got our math test results back, and immediately people start asking each other what they got. And, even if you perform well, seeing someone perform better than you can immediately just like,
Yeah.
disrupt that enjoyment, that boost in happiness. And,
Yeah.
ultimately, it leads to the only person it benefits is the person with like who maybe got a perfect score. But even then, like the comparison is still, it hardly benefits anyone involved. And also in terms of factors that play into happiness, I think something that we don't often talk about in how we individually perceive happiness is like culture, like the way we were raised and like the society we're brought up in. Like certain things are emphasized more than others. Like, for example, if you're brought up in a very academic family, then happiness will, or I mean, those, at least that short-term happiness, and even to some extent in the long term, your happiness is often related to academics, right? What college you get into, like how successful your career is, and all of that depends on the way you were raised, like your family values, and yeah, that's a critical factor in like how we all experience happiness.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point about happiness and comparison. And obviously there's a distinction between like competitiveness and healthy competitiveness. You want to do well, and that's okay. But when you take it too far and you're just comparing, like maybe you and a friend both got a good grade on a math test, but he got or she got a little bit higher, and that kind of like ruins your mood, like Kabir talked about. That's what's unhealthy, and that's what we're trying to get at. But trying to be your best and trying to be competitive is healthy. So there's a difference. But I also want to talk about, what is brought to the forefront of society and what we value, and that's what Kabir brought up, and that connects back to social media. And I just want to do the social media problem justice by saying these social media algorithms are designed to promote extremist or extreme content because the algorithms are programmed to optimize engagement, right? So that's comments, that's likes. And extreme or kind of mean or like bullying content gets the most likes and comments because it's the most polarizing. So that content is pushed to the top of the algorithms. So when you scroll through, that's all you see, this extreme content. It might be 1% on each end of the spectrum, but it makes it seem like it's all the spectrum because it's pushed up the algorithm. That's all you're seeing. So it kind of puts people in these two totally opposite different camps. It kind of increases tension, which obviously it's very clear to see that reduces happiness. So I think it's important to recognize that. As fun as social media might be, there are definitely negative
Yeah.
consequences.
And I think why it's particularly hurtful to high schoolers is because when you're in high school, right, you're finding out what you love to do, right? What you're interested in. You're trying to figure out what classes spike your interests, what activities, you're trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, right? It's before you go out into the real world. So I feel like if you're looking at all this social media and you're comparing yourself to other people daily, whether it be online or just saying, "Oh, what'd you get on that test?" or um, like how'd this go? How'd that go? Right? And you're just constantly comparing yourself. Your self-worth is it's very fragile. And I feel like when you're constantly comparing yourself, it kind of just your self-worth just goes down the drain, right? Because you feel like you're not good enough, right? And let's say I'm really interested in this one thing in school, right? Or this one activity, right? And then I compare myself to the person who's the best at it, then I'm gonna feel like, oh, maybe I'm not good at that. My self-worth will go down. And high school is not supposed to be a time where you're being unconfident and not pursuing what you want to pursue, right? You want to build that base and these interests. And I feel like when you're constantly comparing yourself on social media and school, right, it's like it does the opposite of what you want to do in high school. You want to find purpose, you want to find your interests. And if you're constantly comparing yourself, you're never going to find that, no matter what, no matter how good you are at a certain thing. So, yeah, I feel like that kind of wraps up the social media aspect. But in terms of misconceptions, right? So I feel like we kind of talked about some obstacles, social media, just the busyness of high schoolers and why it's so hard to be happy. But in terms of misconceptions, do any of you guys have like something to say in terms of misconceptions from parents?
Yeah, I think parents often criticize their kids because they think their kids are kind of just like coasting by and is not stressed, like very easygoing way of life. They see their kids like doing whatever they're doing. Maybe they're trying to relax and they're like, You're not trying your best. Why aren't you stressed?" And I think that's a very negative negative frame of mind for a parent because I think most high schoolers are their own biggest critics. I think most high schoolers are their own biggest critics. And they're obviously very stressed. And when they're when a kid is like relaxing, I don't think it's very productive to criticize them or accost them for not trying their hardest. And I know that really gets under my nerves, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kabir, do you have anything to
Yeah. As far as parents go, right? Like, there's often a disconnect between what parents want for their kids and what the kids themselves want, right? So that also applies to happiness, right? You know, even just like briefly reconnecting with social media, like a lot of kids go on social media, after a long or busy school day in order to, de-stress or, gain some dopamine surge during that time online. And a lot of parents will interpret that as just laziness. But the truth is, for a lot of kids, apart from socialization, like socializing opportunities at after school, like social media is a very important opportunity to, de-stress. And, that's kind of misinterpreted by some parents as laziness when, as Ben was saying, that isn't always the case, and people are their own biggest
Yeah.
critics.
I think also in terms of misconceptions for what it means to be happy, for high schoolers, I think from parents, right? So, like I said, high school is supposed to be a time where you're finding your interests, right, and what you want to do with your life. And I feel like a lot of parents kind of feel like their kids are going to be happy if they pursue this path or these interests, and they're going to force them to take these classes, these extracurriculars to kind of set them up in life. But I feel like a lot of the times also there's parents who aren't cognizant of like maybe my kid isn't really interested in this, and it's a lot of parents should push their kids academically, but I think there's some classes and parts of school that maybe your kid isn't good at, or he doesn't find interesting, or he isn't happy in going to class, right? And it's like if you force your kid to do that, right, you're diminishing opportunities to go find stuff they're actually interested in, right? And you're just forcing them to kind of, just go through this process of, oh, well, yeah, you might be suffering now, but at least you'll be happy in the future because you'll be making a lot of money, right? It's like these little things I think that parents kind of like put these expectations on their kids that really, really diminishes their happiness. In terms of misconceptions from teachers, do you guys have anything to add?
Yeah, I think every teacher says they don't think this, but every teacher is a little bit like out of touch in the way that they think the student's life revolves around their class,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think teachers think that, and they think the students get happiness from doing their class or their work, and obviously
Mhm.
that's not true. And I think when high schoolers and teachers are not on the same page with that, it can kind of lead to like it can kind of lead to like communication where there's not a lot of like truth being validated
Yeah.
because the teacher is saying things that they think the high schoolers are going to resonate with and appreciate, but it really makes them more stressed, or they're just kind of um or the high schoolers are kind of bending to the teacher's whims and just saying whatever he or she may want to hear, and that's kind of unhealthy and it continues this cycle of like students just valuing grades.
Yeah, and in terms of students and teachers not really being on the same page, like, of course, some teachers are very, very good about, gauging student happiness and progress, right? But also, I think there tends to be kind of maybe a generational or even cultural divide between students and their teachers, right? Often teachers will be from maybe a couple of generations before their students, and, the processes for high school or admissions, things like that, they've changed. The landscape has evolved dramatically over the past few decades. And, you know, sometimes teachers' expectations of students are based on old models rather than,
Hmm.
adapting to new ones. And I think that can often lead to like some kinds of disconnect between what students can realistically achieve and what teachers are
Mhm.
expecting them to. And that's all based on, it's no one's fault, of course. I mean, it's based on, the way they were raised and the way students are raised. And those are two different parts. And, in order to reconcile those two things, it requires effort. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's not present.
Yeah, I definitely don't think that's present. I feel like a lot of times, right, it's like the only interaction you have with your teacher is, okay, like, tell me what I need to know for the test, and I'm gonna go home and study it. I feel like I don't really know many of my teachers on a kind of deeper level, right? And I feel like you just don't get the opportunity to do that in school, and I feel like that's kind of sad, right? I feel like some classes more than others. I know my English class, I had the opportunity a lot to like kind of talk about life, right? And I feel like that's why I really enjoy English, right? You get to be real and just kind of talk about what's going on outside of school. Ben and I are both in Lang, and we both partake in these discussions, right? And we can kind of just talk about how these texts apply to our lives and how we feel. And it's just like, I feel like that's probably the closest I get in terms of like finding some deeper level connection with the teacher, in order to kind of share like how you're feeling and how you feel when you step into that classroom, right? Because most of the time we're tired, we don't want to be there. But if the teacher is cognizant of that and they recognize that, it makes it so much better. So yeah, I think that's great in terms of the misconceptions. That kind of wraps it up from the parents and teachers' perspectives. And now for kind of like our last segment, um, this is kind of the most important, right? We've kind of talked about all these downfalls and kind of all these cons to why it's so hard to be happy as a high schooler, and it's tough, right? We've stated so many reasons why, but now we're gonna kind of move into some coping strategies, what we do on a daily basis to kind of help ourselves, right? You know, be happy, and not to like toot our own horns, but like we're all like we're all in AP classes. We have tons of stuff going on. Like we know how hard it is, right? And we know how hard it is to prioritize your mental health and yourself. So, we're gonna kind of dive into that, right? So the first kind of coping strategy that I have is happiness is always, I feel like, found through material things in today's world. I feel like high schoolers
Short term.
short term. I feel like high schoolers are constantly looking for things they can buy, things that they can, like materials. And I feel like that makes sense. That's how our brains work. But I feel like something that also isn't looked at enough is being grateful not only for the material things, but also relationships, and kind of like these dynamics that you have in your life. So that's kind of my first coping strategy. Take time to find something you're grateful for. And for me, this is something I do every single night before I go to bed. I just name one thing that went well that day that I was grateful for. So it could be like, oh, today, today sucked. I had a lot of stuff going on, but at least I got to, pet my dog when I got home, or talk to my dad about the Bears game, right? These little things, right? If you kind of zoom out and look at these little moments in life, right? It kind of, you get that little happiness that you get can be amplified when you find time to be grateful for it. So that's my first coping strategy. What about you guys?
Yeah, I think Ethan brought up a great one, and I saw a study where they had people take a survey to measure their happiness, and then after they took the survey, they were instructed to write a letter or make a phone call and express gratitude to someone in their life that they truly valued. And after they took the same survey again, and the survey showed, and the comparison between the two surveys showed a distinct I believe, 25% increase in happiness. And gratitude is something you can apply on a daily basis. Obviously, you can't get an A on a test every day. You can't get a new car every day. You can't get your favorite meal every day. But you can express gratitude every day, and there's a clear, distinct increase in happiness. And that kind of goes into the long-term happiness that it should be your goal and is our goal to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Kabir.
Yeah. So I've kind of talked about this a little bit on the live show, but oftentimes we get so caught up in our daily activities, right? We tend to stress out over every little thing. And sometimes it's important to step back from that and kind of take part in something that isn't necessarily part of your daily routine. And for me, that comes in the form of like other media, like movies or TV shows or even books. And something that I'm gonna make a little bit of a recommendation here. It's this book called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. It's kind of this like meaning of life book, but really the fundamental idea is happiness. It's like the journey we take to achieving happiness, like over time. It's more of like the long-term happiness. But during freshman year, I had to write this like happiness essay based on that book, and it got me thinking about all the ways that we can influence our long-term happiness, not just these like temporary dopamine boosts, but also like in the long term. It's very important to think about how you want your life to go. And I think that book is very, very helpful for that kind of, deep thinking.
Yeah. And I feel like I can think of so many coping strategies, like being grateful, right? That's one. But I feel like there are a lot of things that people say they should do, like journaling, right? What else? Like meditation, like stuff like that. That's good.
Yeah, that's good. That
good.
kind of falls under for us like the category of like mental health. Take 10
exactly. But we feel like there's more to it. So something that we kind of discussed and came up with that I think is kind of beyond that, or can kind of be incorporated into like journaling, is the idea of 1.01 to the power of 365. So you guys are more math people, so do you guys want to explain that?
Yeah, so I think this is a good kind of motivation factor, kind of a big picture factor of like how much reward you can get for a little bit more effort, maybe a little bit more gratitude to your happiness overall, or anything you're trying to achieve. So 1 to the power of 365 means 1 times 1 times 1, 365 times. I don't know if there are any math geniuses out there, but if you do 1 to any power, it's going to be 1. But if you do 1.01, meaning you add 1% every day, you get 1% better every day.
Yep.
1.01 times that times 365, right? 365.
Not times 365.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
To the power, 365. Thank you. So for 365 days in the year, the result of that is over 37.
Mhm.
So if you are trying to get better at something and you do nothing all year, you're going to stay the same. Exactly. If you get 1% better every year, you'll be over 37 times better by the 37 times, right? And maybe this is gratitude. It has to do with your happiness. Maybe this is something else.
Yeah, and I think that kind of that 1.01 to the power of 365, it sounds complicated at first, but I think it really, addresses the idea of like being overwhelmed, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes in order to make change, we feel kind of overwhelmed with what steps we need to take in order to achieve certain changes, right? Like, oh, how am I going to like change in this way? It must take a lot of effort. But, by adding that 1% every day, we kind of remind ourselves that, in order to achieve significant results, you don't even need to put in like an enormous amount of effort every day. Just like little changes, changes of habit, changes of mindset. That's all that's needed, really. And if you do that over time, you are going to change. Like, it's about building habits. It's not about like, changing stuff in the short term, because while that might give you a temporary boost in happiness, of course, you need long-term results in order to change.
And then, go
ahead, Ethan.
Okay. So I think also in terms of happiness, right? People get so scared. They're like, oh, like I'm never gonna fix this part of me. I'm never gonna get better at this, right? But this just goes to show you 1% every single day can lead to 37 times better. And we keep saying this, so we're gonna go ahead and go around and say one thing that we can kind of do like 1% better. So for me, right, I can name a few.
Sorry, can I just say one thing to add on to your?
Yeah.
So we want to obviously give like practical solutions, right? And in the context of gratitude, like we were talking about, gratitude, if you express 1% more gratitude every single day, that happiness compounds over the year.
Yeah.
And you're going to end up happier at the end of the year. But it's important to kind of just talk about what that means, right? We're talking about you can't fix your happiness in 1 week.
Yeah.
By being super grateful in 1 week, it doesn't last. But if you're a little bit more grateful, a little bit more cognizant, a little bit more mindful, a little bit more thoughtful, every single day of the year, just a little bit, like a couple extra minutes, it's really going to compound.
Yep. So we're gonna, that's good. That's good. So now we're just gonna go around, right, and say like what that little thing is, right? So for me, I'll name a few. So one is, I feel like I'm an extrovert, right? At times, I feel like I can also be introverted, but I feel like sometimes why I don't experience that much happiness is because I don't branch out or talk to someone new, or kind of just open myself up. So a goal that I kind of made in terms of this 1% better is try to like engage in conversation with just one person every single day. And just, it could be literally just like a 2-minute conversation on like, about the homework last night and how it went. But I think I find happiness talking to other people. So that's one conversation, right? Every single day that gets amplified and can improve that part of me 37 times. And then another thing, I know this is two, but this can also be in terms of like physical, like if you're working out, this can also be a coping strategy, right? A lot of people like working out to relieve anxiety and stress. But I push myself 1% harder, right? Every single day. And that's part of also like the Spartan like lifting, right? They always talk about little results, right? And I try to push myself 1% harder every single day in the gym, right? So I can feel that like satisfaction that like I push myself, right? Like I can go to sleep knowing that I give it everything I got, right? And it doesn't have to be 10%. It literally is just 1% better. That's a win. It's like these small wins. So Ben, Kabir, what's like one thing you guys do for that one?
I know, Ethan, you said you're an extrovert. I'm definitely not. I'm an introvert, but sometimes that kind of to be honest, it could make me feel a little bit isolated, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
So I think getting a little bit better, like maybe putting myself out there, maybe send like one text every day to just try and reach out to people, like talk to people a little bit more. I think that would be very beneficial.
Mm.
Yeah. And I know you guys were talking about like social situations, right? But I think another thing, I mean, especially for me, an important like little 1% change every day that I try to accomplish is just like little organizational things. Like, you know, it's kind of a difficult thing for me, like organization, like just, sticking to a daily routine, as strange as it may sound for a high school junior, I sometimes struggle with organization. And, that can be as simple as like adding new things to like a daily planner or something like that. Things that just help me keep track of my daily schedule and that ensure that I don't like lose track of time or stuff like that. Because even those like little changes, like writing down something in a notebook, like it can really make a difference over time, especially if you build it into a habit.
Yeah, I think that's great. So I feel like, right, in terms of coping strategies, like we said, there's so many things you can do. There's journaling, right? You can just search it up, like meditation, like all these things you can like look up on YouTube, right? But I feel like in terms of like this type of like cliche awareness, right? Like people just say, "Oh, go home and take 5 deep breaths. Write down 5 things you're grateful for." Like I feel like in terms of like this 1% better and taking that action every single day, this is the reason why. So we're kind of giving like this explanation of like, yeah, those good things are important, but you have to understand why you're doing it, and this is kind of why. So in terms of coping strategies, right, we that kind of sums that up. But in terms of right the bigger picture, so I think this what we're about to talk about is the most powerful way to find sustainable happiness. So like we said, happiness, and especially for high schoolers, is so fleeting. It's so short term. There's little things there and like here and there, right, where it can just bring you a little bit of happiness. But in terms of the big picture, I'm gonna kind of intro this with a quote, right? Ben, we're talking about this, Dana White.
Yeah,
Yes, he says
the
that.
man I'll be the president of the UFC.
Yeah, he says, the famous quote is, "Find something you would do for free, and then wake up and do that every single day as a career." So I think in terms of happiness, right? To be happy, right? Like going back to our terms, like what we define, right? I said it's being happy with the good, the bad, just how life is as itself. So I think if, it's kind of hard for high schoolers to like life, I guess, right? Because high school, like no one, I think 100% enjoys high school, thinks that's what they're going to be doing for the rest of their life, because they're not. But I think you need to find a little niche, a little spark in you that kind of drives your will to get up. And we'll go around and say that. But do you guys have anything to add in terms of finding that purpose?
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier, but the way that we often approach happiness, right? Tying it to good results over time, like while that might supply like a short-term boost of happiness, like if you're going to view results as the only thing supporting your happiness, like that's going to be problematic in the long term because, life's full of ups and downs. And, as cliche as that sounds, like, it's really true. Like one day you might do well on a test, the next day you might not. And what happiness is just supposed to cancel out.
Yeah.
I think that's a very, shallow way to view it. And although we're all like prone to viewing it that way, in order to cultivate like some sense of sustainable happiness, it kind of involves like going with the flow. We often fixate on daily life, like the problems of our lives, but as we mentioned before, it's important to like zoom out and view those like tiny little things that make it worth it.
Yeah. So exactly, finding what makes it worth it, right? If that's what you said. So like I said, we're gonna go around and kind of share our, personal testimonies, right? But for me, right? So in terms of finding something I would do every single day, right, and do it for free, for me, that's helping people. So I've come to realize the most joy and happiness I get is when I make other people feel happy. I'm a people pleaser, right? And as, cliche as that sounds, right, that's kind of like my purpose, right? So, going to school and doing everything that I do, right? I'm super busy, but I kind of have to put myself into a different perspective and understand why am I doing this. So, for example, why am I going to high school every day? Why am I getting barely any sleep and pushing myself to the absolute limits, trying to get the best grades possible, and then also do all these extracurriculars and volunteer, right? I have to go back to like my so what, like my purpose, right? And that's helping people. So I've come to realize something that I'm actually really interested in is medicine, and my goal is to become a doctor one day. So that's kind of how I, approach school, right? Even though this A push reading, right, might not be the most applicable to my purpose and what I want to accomplish in life. It's one little step that I have to go through in order to achieve this my long-term goals, right? And that's how I kind of view, how I partake in all these different activities. And it doesn't have to be just school. There are certain things like I volunteer at my church. I lead a small group of junior high boys. I like serving other people in that way with their faith. I'm in a bunch of different clubs, right? It's like finding that drive, because it's not fun, it's not fulfilling to go through all these motions, right? Of like high school. It's just not sustainable. You're not going to find actual happiness doing that. So that's kind of my take on it. Ben and Kabir.
Yeah, I know Ethan earlier called me a computer science nerd in a very complimentary way, you know, but that's something that I find, very, very interesting, and like math like that, and that provides me, I think, even as weird as it sounds, it does provide me like happiness and meaning, trying to understand it, and it obviously affects the world in a very significant way, and if I can be part of that and contribute, to like advancements in science and technology and all these things that have such profound and impactful effects on the world, that would make me happy. And that's what all this is driven by, and that's what I'm working toward, hopefully.
Yeah, so something big that motivates me, actually two things are hobbies and the idea of having kind of a new experience every day. So in terms of hobbies, one of the things that I love to do the most of all is like music. I love to play the piano and just listen to music in general. I think that's one of the things that drives me and gives me, it's very motivational, listening the experience of listening to music. And also like in terms of um like daily life, often I get kind of bored by like a daily routine and dull, like keeping the same types of activities every single day. So I think something that really drives me is like the idea of doing something new every day. Like that's something like enormously like different, but just like you know taking a new like route through the school, or like doing something like doing something slightly different like that. It goes back to that idea of like changing your life by 1%. You know, adding those little changes to your routine, or my routine, they kind of give me a sense of joy and refresh. They kind of refresh me every single day, and I think that's a part of why I like to go through new adventures every day, like just changing little things in my life.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, right, what we're trying to get at here is you can do all these things that will bring you short-term happiness. But like I said earlier, high school, you need to find what you're interested in, what you're going to spend the rest of your life doing. And you don't have to do it necessarily in high school, but I think for anyone, right, I think high school is a great time because you're exposed to so many different people, so many different activities and subjects. And I think finding that drive to like get up out of bed, even when life sucks, right? Even when it's 5 degrees out here in Chicago, right? And you have to go to school and take all these tests. Like, why are you doing it? Because if you're going through the motions, you're inevitably going to feel down and stressed. But if you reframe that in terms of, this is a step in order to achieve this long-term goal, or finding fulfilling a true fulfilling life, right? I think that's kind of how you need to reframe these little day-to-day activities. So yeah, that's kind of the big picture, right? So I think in terms of happiness, right, today we kind of defined our terms, right? Talked about our experiences, high school experiences in general, some factors, some obstacles that go into it, like social media, just the busyness of high schoolers, some common misconceptions from parents and teachers, some coping strategies that we all gave, and then the big picture that we think is the most powerful when it comes to finding true happiness. Finding your why, finding your so what. So before we go and give a little preview for our next episode, you guys have anything to share?
Yeah. So I think a big part of happiness overall, right? It it's kind of a balance, right? It's a balance between managing the unfortunate parts of your life and also, savoring the great parts, right? If you do both, it's kind of difficult to consistently feel bad about life, right? Because, um, unless you have some kind of other problem, like I mean, I have a little bit of a depressive condition. I take medication for that, and although I have that problem, I think balancing the negative parts and the positive parts, and going with that flow, in addition to doing new things every day, I think doing all of that in conjunction, it's just a very healthy way to live from the perspective of your mind, and it really just helps you maintain stability in the long term.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. Ben, anything else to add?
Yeah, I think, keeping perspective each day about, and Kabir talked about managing the unfortunate parts of your life, but just keeping perspective every day. We talk about this big picture, right? And what we're trying to achieve. And you have to view that in comparison to what happens every day. Maybe you got a bad grade. Maybe something unfortunate happens. But again, you have to be driven by your why and not let those little things get you down. And over the long term, that's going to be very beneficial, and you'll reap the rewards of that attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. So hopefully this helped, no matter, if you're a high schooler yourself, a parent, a teacher, whatever, right? Our goal is to just bring more awareness in a way that makes sense, not just these cliche ways that we see in our lives, right? Trying to be upfront and real here. This was fun, right? This was our remake of the Drury Awards show that we made earlier this year. But we're actually going to be getting into this. We're going to be releasing more episodes of our podcast. We do have our live radio show every 5 to 6 on Thursdays, Mind Matters. So you can definitely tune into that.
5 p.m.
Yeah, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Thanks for clarifying, man. But we feel like the podcast right now, this is more of a time to kind of organize our thoughts. We feel like that's kind of frantic at times on the live radio, but we feel like this is a good time to kind of organize things and present them in a well put together manner. So in terms of our next episodes, we're still brainstorming, right? But Ben, Kabir, do you guys have any some cliffhangers to give to the rest of the listeners?
Yeah, so this pursuit of happiness thing is kind of part of a larger and more expansive high school series, right? The whole show is driven around high school mental health, from a high school perspective, and it's the only one that does that, and that's the best for high schoolers. So, the next one might be something like stress, friendship, managing your time, things like that, and we're going to get into that, and it's something to look forward to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Our next episode, we're going to be going into some different rules or laws about not actual laws, but just general things you can do in your life to kind of improve your work efficiency, improve your work-life balance, things like 21-90 rule, Pomodoro technique. We'll be going into that.
Connecting to stress.
Yeah, so our next episode, we kind of just ruined it, but yes, it's gonna be about
Stress hanger.
Yes, it's gonna be about stress, right? We feel like we talked about that today in terms of our happiness episode, but we feel like stress is unmatched when you're a high schooler. So we're definitely going to dive into that. But we hope everyone who is listening, right, enjoyed our episode. And we'll catch you next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And just remember, your mind matters.